The early morning sun painted the towering glass facade of Oric's innovations in gold, making it gleam like a monument to success. It was the kind of building that made passers-by pause and look up, a symbol of corporate dominance in the heart of downtown Chicago. But that morning, as high heels clicked against polished marble floors and coffee cups steamed in the hands of bustling employees, something far more consequential was about to unfold, though no one inside that lobby knew it yet. A woman entered, tall, poised, and quiet. Selena Morrison, CEO of Nova Helix, one of the fastest-growing biotech firms in the world, walked in without entourage, without fanfare. Her slate gray wool coat fell just below the knees. Underneath, a high-neck black dress hugged her frame modestly. No logos, no diamonds. Just a quiet elegance that seemed to hum with power for those who knew how to look. But most people didn't look. Certainly not Haley Trent, the young receptionist seated behind the front desk. With a glossy bun and an ever-scrolling phone screen, Haley barely glanced up before barking. "Deliveries go around the back." Selena stopped mid-step. For a moment, there was only the soft hum of the lobby lights and distant elevator chimes. She tilted her head slightly, as if trying to decide whether to explain or simply walk away. "I'm here for a 9 a.m. with Mr. Garrett," she said, her voice calm and composed. Haley lifted her eyes, scanning Selena from head to toe with the same suspicion one reserves for a stranger knocking on their back door. She offered a condescending smile. "I don't see your name. Are you sure you're at the right place?" Across the room, Charles Whitmore, Executive Vice President of Oric, watched the scene unfold from the mezzanine. He recognized Selena instantly, but said nothing. A tiny smirk curled at the corner of his mouth. Selena's hands remained gently folded in front of her. "Would you mind checking again? It's important." Haley sighed, pretending to tap at her keyboard. "Nope. Still nothing." Her voice dropped to a cruel whisper. "Maybe don't waste people's time next time, sweetheart." And with that, she reached for the security phone. As two guards made their way across the lobby, Naomi King, a black department manager standing on the second floor, froze. Her breath caught in her throat as she watched the security team approach. She recognized Selena. Everyone in tech did. But like Charles, she didn't move. Not yet. Selena didn't flinch as the guards escorted her out. Her eyes never left the massive Oric Innovations logo above the reception desk. The moment her heels touched the pavement outside, she pulled out her phone, her voice low and sharp. "Initiate Plan X, effective immediately." And with those 6 words, the fate of Oric Innovations was sealed long before anyone inside realized they had just made the costliest mistake of their corporate lives. Inside the sleek, sunlit lobby of Oric Innovations, silence settled like dust after Selena Morrison was escorted out. Haley Trent adjusted her posture, brushing imaginary lint from her blazer, clearly proud of her assertiveness. Across from her, a young intern named Lucas Park stood frozen near the coffee station, his eyes still on the door that had just closed behind Selena. He wasn't sure what had just happened, but something about the woman's calm presence lingered with eerie weight. Haley leaned toward her colleague and whispered with a smug grin, "They all think if they dress a little classy, they can just walk in and demand meetings." Her tone dripped with condescension. Lucas hesitated before muttering, "She didn't look like a delivery person." Haley scoffed. "Please, if she was important, someone would have told me." I can spot a faker a mile away. Unbeknownst to her, from the glass mezzanine above, Naomi King hadn't moved. Her hand remained gripped on the steel railing, her knuckles white, her stomach churning. She had recognized Selena Morrison instantly. Everyone who worked in biotech knew her face. But watching her treated like she didn't belong, like she was less than, triggered something deeper in Naomi, not just fury, but fear. She knew that stepping in now would mark her, possibly cost her everything she'd worked for in this company that only barely tolerated her presence. Her heart pounded with guilt. Downstairs, Charles Whitmore returned to his office, closing the door with deliberate quiet. He stared out the window but wasn't really looking at the skyline. He was calculating. Letting the humiliation happen had been intentional. Charles had never supported the potential merger with Nova Helix. It threatened his influence, his comfort zone, and the CEO being a black woman that made it all the more intolerable. He knew what Selena's silence meant. She hadn't screamed. She hadn't fought. She had absorbed it, and that terrified him more than any confrontation. Across town, in the back seat of a black electric SUV, Selena removed her coat slowly, folding it across her lap. Her assistant, Marina, sat beside her, glancing nervously at her phone. "They just sent a message confirming your appointment with Garrett again. I think they've realized." Selena didn't look up. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Too late. The car turned a corner, heading toward Nova Helix's downtown campus. In her lap, Selena's phone buzzed. She opened a folder marked Oric's contingency, eyes scanning the names of investors, board members, and legal representatives. This wasn't personal anymore. It was about principle. Because if Oric's Innovations treated someone like her this way, what did that say about how they treated those with no titles, no power, no name? And now, Selena Morrison was going to make sure the entire world found out. By 11:15 a.m., the Oric's Innovations boardroom was in chaos. Phones buzzed nonstop. Faces once composed and confident now flickered with concern. The initial morning chatter had been replaced with alarmed whispers as news rippled through the company like a brewing storm. And at the center of it all was a name now vibrating across shareholder lines and investment networks: Selena Morrison. When the media alert came through, Nova Helix withdraws strategic deal with Oric amid undisclosed incident, the temperature in the room dropped. CEO Daniel Garrett, flanked by senior leadership, stared at the screen, eyes widening with each line of the report. "What is this?" he growled, slamming the tablet onto the conference table. No one answered. A soft voice finally spoke. "Sir, I believe this is in response to what happened this morning at reception." It was a junior manager, pale and visibly nervous. Daniel turned slowly, his voice low and threatening. "Reception. Silence." Then, from the back of the room, someone added. The front desk turned away. Someone, a guest. She was escorted out. Daniel's jaw tensed. "Who?" The room hesitated before the name was finally uttered. "Selena Morrison." For a moment, the room went still, as if the oxygen had been vacuumed out. "You're telling me," Daniel said, his voice flat, "that my staff kicked out one of the most powerful CEOs in biotech." A stunned hush fell, then panic. "We need damage control," someone muttered. "Immediately." But outside that boardroom, damage was already spreading. Social media erupted with clips from security footage in employee smartphones. The video, grainy but damning, showed Haley Trent gesturing dismissively at Selena, followed by two large security guards forcefully leading her out. The hashtag Gone Oric discriminates trended within minutes. Influencers, tech executives, and community leaders condemned the company publicly. Selena, however, said nothing. That silence became louder than words. At Nova Helix, she sat behind her desk, tablet open to an internal dashboard. With calm precision, she reviewed the full dossier on Oric, their vulnerabilities, their past lawsuits, the minor scandals they'd buried. She had never planned to use it, but now it was a necessary reckoning. Her assistant Marina re-entered the room. Legal team's ready. Press release is finalized. We're pulling out completely from all collaborative projects, joint patents, and licensing agreements. Selena nodded once. And the lawsuit filed discrimination, defamation, and breach of ethical conduct. Selena leaned back in her chair, her gaze distant. I never wanted this, she said softly, but they needed to learn. At Oric, Haley Trent sat frozen in HR, hands clasped tightly, tears pooling in her lap. Janet Reese, head of human resources, stood across from her, face like stone. This is no longer a disciplinary issue, Janet said coldly. You've become a liability, Haley stammered. I didn't know who she was. It's not about who she was, Janet interrupted. It's about how you treated someone who didn't look like power. That's the problem. Outside, employees gathered in the halls, whispering, trading theories, sending texts with a video link attached. No one laughed now. And far above, on the executive floor, Charles Whitmore watched from his window, face unreadable. The moment was playing out exactly as he had expected, but not entirely as he had planned. He hadn't anticipated the blowback to be this swift or this dangerous. He turned from the glass and whispered to himself. She didn't scream. She didn't threaten. She just walked away and took everything with her. By the time the noon bell chimed from the neighboring tower, Oric Innovations was no longer the untouchable empire it had been when the sun rose. The fallout had begun. News outlets splashed headlines across every screen. Nova Helix CEO humiliated at Oric HQ strategic partnership canceled amid accusations of racism. Leaked security footage sparks corporate firestorm. Investors panicked. Shareholders flooded phone lines. Stock value plummeted 17% in just under 2 hours. In his corner office, Daniel Garrett, CEO of Oric, stood stiff as a board, staring at the financial dashboard that bled red numbers. His voice trembled as he turned to his assistant. Get everyone into the boardroom. Now. Meanwhile, in the reception area, Haley Trent sat hunched, alone, surrounded by whispers and side glances. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Friends, family, strangers online flooding her inbox with criticism, mockery, threats. Her face was now the face of corporate racism. But she still didn't fully understand the magnitude of her mistake until Daniel Garrett appeared in front of the desk. His face contorted with fury. Do you have any idea what you've done? She stood, panicking. I didn't know who she was. No one told me. Daniel's voice exploded through the lobby. You didn't need to know who she was. All you had to do was treat her like a human being. The entire lobby fell silent. Then came the final blow. "You're terminated. Effective immediately." Haley's knees buckled. She collapsed back into her seat, the realization finally cutting through her arrogance like ice. Upstairs, chaos awaited. The boardroom buzzed with fury and fear. Charles Whitmore, arms crossed in the corner, watched silently as Daniel paced the room. "We just lost our biggest future revenue stream. Our reputation is in the gutter. If this spirals, we'll be facing federal scrutiny, investor lawsuits, maybe even SEC involvement." A quiet voice interrupted. "Sir, we already are." Everyone turned. The head of compliance held up a tablet. "We've received a formal notice. Nova Helix is suing not only for breach of conduct, but also filing a civil rights complaint with federal regulators. And there's more." Daniel rubbed his forehead. "More? Yes. An anonymous internal leak just exposed emails." He handed the tablet over. Daniel read in silence, the blood draining from his face. They were internal communications between Charles Whitmore and James Callahan, CEO of Genevora Biotech, Oric's largest competitor. The emails revealed Charles had deliberately sabotaged the deal with Nova Helix to weaken Garrett's leadership, going as far as encouraging a hostile environment for Selena Morrison. Charles didn't flinch as eyes turned toward him. "This is business," he said flatly. "You think I'm the only one here who's played dirty? You betrayed this company." Daniel spat. "You sold us out." "No," Charles replied with eerie calm. "You let your company rot from the inside. I just made sure it collapsed faster." Security was called. Charles was removed, but the damage was already done. That evening, in a modest community hall on the south side, Selena Morrison stood before a room full of young entrepreneurs. Her expression was calm, but her words cut through the noise of the day. "They didn't just disrespect me," she said. "They disrespected every person who's ever walked into a room and been told, 'You don't belong here.' So I made a decision, not out of anger, but responsibility. If a company tolerates that kind of culture, then it shouldn't lead in any industry." The room erupted in applause, and far away, the lights inside Oric's Innovations began to dim, not just from the power grid, but from the weight of a company built on ego, now collapsing under its own hypocrisy. Weeks passed, but the storm surrounding Oric's Innovations showed no sign of slowing. Headlines turned into legal filings. Investors pulled out. Public trust was shattered. And inside the glass towers of downtown Chicago, once symbols of pride and power, silence grew louder than ever before. In a modest apartment on the city's west side, Haley Trent sat curled on her couch, jobless, reputation ruined, watching herself go viral for all the wrong reasons. The video of her sneering at Selena Morrison had been looped on news networks, spliced into documentaries, and used in seminars on unconscious bias. She couldn't go outside without feeling like every eye followed her. Her phone had stopped ringing, not because people had forgotten, but because they remembered too well. She had applied for dozens of jobs. None replied. Those who did knew her name and wanted nothing to do with it. Then one morning, an envelope arrived. It was from Nova Helix Legal Division. Inside was a letter stating that Selena Morrison had chosen not to pursue the $2 million lawsuit for defamation and racial discrimination. On one condition, Haley would complete 1,000 hours of community service at the Equity Forward Initiative, a nonprofit training center for marginalized youth in tech. Shaking, Haley reread the letter. It wasn't mercy, it was accountability. Meanwhile, in a newly renovated building once known as the Oric HQ, workers affixed a new nameplate above the entrance, the Polaris Hub, a Carter initiative for innovation and equity inside. Teams of young developers, data scientists, and entrepreneurs bustled through open, sunlit halls. Most of them were Black, Latino, Indigenous, or first-generation immigrants individuals who had long been overlooked by the industry. And at the center of it all stood Naomi King, now appointed Director of Operations. On her first official day, she walked the halls slowly, hands brushing the walls that once echoed with silence and shame. In the main conference room where she used to sit quietly at the edge of meetings, she now stood at the head of the table, and in front of her stood Selena Morrison. "You ready for this?" Selena asked, a faint smile playing on her lips. Naomi nodded. More than ever. Selena stepped closer, her voice warm but resolute. "This isn't about revenge, Naomi. It never was. This is about making sure that what happened to us doesn't keep happening to others." Naomi's voice broke softly. "I spent years thinking I had to stay quiet to survive. And now," Selena asked. "Now," Naomi said firmly, "I'm ready to speak and build." They shook hands, two women who had once stood on opposite sides of a glass wall. Now, they were building a foundation stronger than any glass ceiling ever built to keep them out. Across town, Haley entered the doors of the community center for her first shift. She was nervous, ashamed, uncertain. But as she watched a young girl show her code to a mentor and beam with pride, something inside her shifted. It wasn't about fixing the past. It was about facing it and learning from it. And somewhere, quietly watching the city lights from her office at Nova Helix, Selena Morrison allowed herself a rare smile. Because from the rubble of arrogance and prejudice, something stronger had risen, a future made of fairness, opportunity, and the quiet power of those who refuse to be invisible any longer. Exactly 1 year after Oric's innovations collapsed, the building that once cast a shadow over Chicago's tech quarter now shimmered with renewed purpose. Gone were the sterile walls and the cold, towering reception desk. In their place stood the Polaris Hub, a vibrant center for innovation, diversity, and justice, launched by Selena Morrison as a symbol of what corporate culture could become when guided by empathy and vision. On the rooftop terrace, overlooking the city skyline, Selena stood beside Naomi King, who had become the heart of the center's operations. Dozens of young innovators buzzed below, collaborating, dreaming, building the future. Selena watched them quietly, a soft breeze catching the edge of her long coat. "We turned a wound into a window," Naomi said beside her, voice steady, eyes glowing with purpose. "A place that once silenced people like us now amplifies voices." Selena nodded. "It was never just about righting a wrong. It was about planting something new beneath them." The building pulsed with energy. The halls echoed with laughter, dialogue, determination. Scholarships had been launched, mentorship programs flourished, and tech startups born from the center were already gaining attention nationwide. But perhaps the greatest success was quieter, less measurable. Dignity had returned. Belonging had taken root. Across town, in a modest office at a community outreach center, Haley Trent sat at a small desk, helping a young man write his first orasum. Her face was softer now. The old sharpness in her voice was gone. She spoke less, listened more. She had completed over 700 hours of service. It hadn't erased her past, but it had reshaped her future. And every day, she walked a little straighter, not with pride, but with humility. In the evenings, she often passed by the old Oric's building, now Polaris, and paused, just for a moment, to look up at its glowing windows. She had once stood inside, mistaking a gate for a wall. She now understood the price of prejudice and the quiet grace of being given a second chance to make things right. Far away in the Colorado mountains, Richard Lawson, the former CEO of Oric, lived in quiet solitude. His career was over. His name reduced to a footnote in corporate textbooks under the chapter, What Not to Do. Each morning, he brewed his coffee in silence, reading updates on the tech world he once ruled. He saw the headlines, Polaris Hub launches equity incubator for youth. Selena Morrison to advise federal counsel on corporate ethics. Naomi King among most influential women in tech. Richard didn't feel envy. He felt the ache of realization. He hadn't just failed as a leader. He had failed as a steward of people. And by the time he recognized the cost, it was far too late to fix it. Back in Chicago, Selena stood on stage at the Polaris Anniversary Gala, a single spotlight warming her expression. The future, she said, addressing a room of leaders, dreamers, and changemakers, isn't built by those who seek to protect comfort. It's built by those who confront discomfort with integrity. She paused. I walked into a building one morning and was told to leave, not because I lacked credentials, but because I didn't fit the image of power. So I built something better, not to prove I belonged, but to make sure everyone else did. The room erupted in applause, and as the light dimmed and the celebration continued, Selena stepped aside, watching as Naomi led a group of young engineers through the crowd, laughing, inspired, alive. The legacy had begun, not in the fall of a company, but in the rise of something greater, something just, something enduring. The lights inside the Polaris Hub dimmed gently as the evening wore on. The anniversary celebration had ended, but its echoes lingered in every hallway, in every mural painted by young artists, in every glass wall now etched with quotes about equity and resilience. In a quiet office on the third floor, Selena Morrison sat alone, the city skyline flickering outside the window like a river of stars. She wasn't thinking about profits, or press coverage, or even the applause from earlier that evening. She was thinking about the moment 1 year ago when she had stood outside Oric's Innovations, her arm gripped by a security guard, her dignity tested in front of strangers who didn't see her, didn't want to, and how, instead of breaking, she had simply straightened her coat and walked away. She had chosen silence not as surrender, but as strategy. And now that silence had reshaped an industry, downstairs, Naomi King wandered through the nearly empty atrium, her heels echoing softly against polished floors. Her hand brushed a plaque near the front desk right where Haley Trent once sat. It read, "No one belongs more than those who were once told they didn't." It had been Selena's idea. Naomi smiled. The word struck differently now, not just as a truth, but as a promise, one that she had committed her life to keep. Just then, a voice called softly behind her. Haley Trent. Dressed modestly, she held a box of donated laptops, I figured I'd drop these off for the youth program, she said, her tone quiet, unsure. Naomi nodded, not unkindly. You can leave them by the outreach table. Haley hesitated. I've been volunteering at the community center across town. Tech training. Mostly. Naomi met her eyes calm but steady. I know, she said. Word gets around. There was no warmth in her tone, but there was no malice either. Haley exhaled slowly. I can't undo what I did, but maybe I can still do something right. Naomi didn't respond. She just offered a slight nod, then turned and walked away. For Haley, it was enough. Elsewhere, in a dimly lit room of a halfway house outside Phoenix, Mark Whitmore, the once calculating executive, watched an old news clip of Polaris Hub opening its third satellite center in Atlanta. He sat motionless. No suit, no power, just a man alone with his regrets. He had tried to orchestrate Selena's fall, and instead paved the way for her rise. And he knew now that was the final irony of his legacy. He had underestimated her silence, and it had destroyed everything he built. Back in Chicago, as midnight approached, Selena finally stood from her desk. She took one last look at the glowing city below. A knock came at the door. It was Naomi. Everyone's gone, she said gently. You ready to head out? Selena smiled. Just finishing one last thing. She reached into her drawer and pulled out a small envelope, unaddressed, unsigned. Inside, just a single quote written in her own hand. Power is not loud. Power is the decision to build when you have every reason to burn it all down. She slid it into the wall safe beneath the Polaris blueprints. Beside her original rejection letter from Oric, Naomi tilted her head. What's that for? Just a reminder, Selena replied, of where we began. They walked out together, their heels echoing softly in the stillness. Behind them, the logo of the Polaris Hub glowed quietly in the darkness, a monument. More a lighthouse, guiding those still searching for a place to be seen. 6 months after the second Polaris satellite opened in Atlanta, a shift began to stir across the tech industry. Quiet at first, like the tremor before a quake, but undeniable. The story of Selena Morrison and the fall of Oric's innovations had become more than a cautionary tale. It had become a movement. From Silicon Valley boardrooms to university lecture halls, leaders were reevaluating what had once been excused as oversights. Companies began conducting internal audits, not just of compliance, but of culture, not out of fear, but because something in the tone of the industry had changed. It wasn't just about public relations anymore. It was about conscience. At a national tech summit in San Francisco, Selena took the stage for a keynote speech. She didn't open with a PowerPoint or a flashy statistic. Instead, she told a simple story. Someone once told me to use the back door, she began. That moment could have ended something, but it ended up starting everything. The room was silent. CEOs, venture capitalists, students, and skeptics all leaned in. What we allow in small rooms echoes through entire buildings, she continued. If we let bias pass unchallenged at the front desk, it will fester in the hiring process, poison leadership, and eventually destroy innovation itself. Applause rose slowly, then swelled, first respectful, then roaring. Afterward, several major tech firms announced new diversity-led accelerators, mentorship coalitions, and joint initiatives with Polaris Hub. It was no longer just Selena's fight. It had become an industry-wide reckoning. Meanwhile, in a small classroom inside Polaris Chicago, Naomi King guided a group of students through a hands-on AI ethics workshop. The students' ages, 17 to 22, came from backgrounds the industry often overlooked: low-income neighborhoods, immigrant families, underfunded schools. They were smart, hungry, brilliant, and now they were being seen. Naomi paused as one student, a shy girl named Lena, stood to present a project. Her app helped to detect biased language in hiring ads, flagging subtle phrases that discouraged minority applicants. "It's called Equal Say," Lena said nervously. "It's still early, but I want to make hiring fair." The room clapped. Naomi smiled, her eyes misty. A year ago, she had stood frozen on a mezzanine, powerless to stop injustice. Today, she was nurturing those who would build a better future. Across the country, Haley Trent now worked full-time for a nonprofit that trained former inmates in tech literacy. Every week, she met people who had been shut out by systems they never designed, but still had to survive within. She no longer introduced herself by her former title. She introduced herself with humility and a story of change. "I lost everything because I refused to see the human being in front of me," she told one class, "but I got one chance to do better, so I show up here." To earn it, over and over again. Some nodded, some stared, but all listened. In Washington, D.C., Selena sat in a hearing room, offering testimony before a bipartisan commission on ethical innovation. She wasn't there to campaign or condemn. She was there to share data and remind lawmakers that innovation must be rooted in equity. When asked what she believed the future needed most, she answered without hesitation: courage, not in algorithms, in people. Back in Chicago, on a crisp evening at Polaris, a new mural had just been finished on the east wall, stretching 5 stories tall. It featured dozens of faces, some real, some symbolic. At the center, a woman walking forward, coat flowing, eyes fierce but kind. Below it, a quote read, "They tried to silence her with a locked door. She answered by building a house with open windows." Selena stood beneath it, Naomi by her side, the students gathering in the plaza with glowing devices and bright eyes. And somewhere deep in Selena's heart, she knew this wasn't a ripple anymore. It was a wave, and it was still rising. Spring arrived gently in Chicago. The trees lining the avenues near the Polaris Hub swayed with new blossoms, their soft petals catching the breeze like silent confetti, celebrating something deeper than seasons, the quiet blooming of a new era. Inside the Hub's main auditorium, over 200 young innovators gathered for the inaugural Polaris Fellowship Summit, a weekend of collaboration, mentorship, and storytelling. They came from across the country. Some had never left their hometowns before. Others had already built prototypes, pitched to venture capitalists, or launched social impact startups. But here, they were not competing. They were building together. At the heart of it all stood Naomi King, now Chief Vision Officer of Polaris. No longer shadowed by doubt or hesitation, Naomi had become the voice many young professionals turned to for guidance, not because she demanded attention, but because she embodied it. That morning, she stepped on stage to deliver the keynote. She glanced at the crowd, so many faces filled with determination, reflection, and quiet belief. "When I first walked into this building," Naomi began, It belonged to a company that ignored voices like mine. Today, you've turned this place into a sanctuary of possibility. You are proof that change isn't just something we wait for. It's something we become. The crowd rose in applause, not loud, but long, because it wasn't just about her. It was about them. Backstage, Selena Morrison stood with her arms folded, watching with a serene pride. She didn't need to speak today. Her presence was enough. Over the past year, she had shifted her focus from public stages to deeper systems, quietly shaping policy, funding grassroots innovation labs, and investing in the infrastructure that allowed voices like Naomi's, Lena's, and countless others to be amplified. Her power now lay in lifting, not leading. But as she stepped into the crowd after the speech, students still gravitated toward her like iron to magnet. They didn't ask her about the lawsuit or the downfall of Oric. They asked her, "How did you know it would work?" She smiled, soft and clear. "I didn't. I just knew silence wasn't an option." Meanwhile, Haley Trent, now an education coordinator at Equity Forward, was mentoring a group of formerly incarcerated young adults on digital literacy. One of her students, a tall, quiet man named Darnell, approached her after class. "You really worked at that big company?" he asked skeptically. She nodded. "I did, and I messed up. Badly. So why are you here?" Haley looked at him, her voice calm. "Because someone gave me a chance to rebuild, and I'm trying to pass that on." Darnell didn't say anything for a long time. Then he simply nodded and walked away. Haley knew that was enough for now. On the anniversary of the Polaris Hub's founding, the city unveiled a commemorative installation on the plaza lawn, an abstract sculpture of an open door, forged from recycled glass and steel from the old Oric building. At its base, a plaque read, "To every voice that was told to wait outside, this door stays open. Always." Naomi placed her hand on the cool metal, beside Lena, now a lead developer at a startup born from Polaris. The two women stood together, different ages, different journeys, but bound by a shared truth: no one builds the future alone. As the sun dipped behind the skyline, Selena joined them quietly. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Because standing together beneath the glow of the Polaris Hub, surrounded by tomorrow's leaders, dreamers, and doers, they knew the future wasn't something far away. It was already happening. And this time, everyone had a key. This story is a powerful reminder that in today's world, true leadership isn't measured by titles or appearances, but by integrity, empathy, and courage. In workplaces and communities, bias still quietly shapes who gets heard and who gets dismissed. But silence, when rooted in wisdom and action, can become a catalyst for change. Selena's journey shows that the greatest impact often comes not from revenge, but from building something better. In an age where equity and inclusion are no longer optional, we must choose to see, to listen, and to create space for those long kept at the margins.